Stanley Kubrick's films, particularly his later work, are a web of connections between themes, characters, plots, images, and dialogue, to the point where knowing things about one film of his will do a lot in understanding things about a different film of his. And at the center of this big web of ideas is 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I thought I'd start connecting some dots by first dealing with 2001 and specifically HAL 9000. HAL's presence in the film is very little in the amount of time relative to the plot of the film, but a whole lot in regards to screen time. The film's plot spans millions of years, but the few days or so of HAL's screen time takes up a good chunk of the film, so that definitely makes him an important factor in the film. But what is his story, really? On the surface, all we really know is that he appeared to malfunction in some manner and try to kill the people aboard the ship. From there we can assume so many things, so I'm just going to share precisely what I think happened during the Jupiter mission with HAL 9000. First, some information on HAL. During the TV interview with the astronauts, the interviewer explains,
the HAL 9000 computer, which can reproduce, though some experts still prefer to use the word mimic, most of the activities of the human brain, and with incalculably greater speed and reliability.
In the interview, HAL says,
"Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error."
Dave also says,
Well, he acts like he has genuine emotions. Of course, he's programmed that way to make it easier for us to talk to him. But as to whether or not he has real feelings is something I don't think anyone can truthfully answer.
Frank and Hal play a chess game, and while I'm not a chess expert and so I can't really get into too much of the way that the game plays out, there is supposedly a mistake on Hal's part, in which he says,
"I'm sorry, Frank, I think you missed it. Queen to bishop 3, bishop takes queen, knight takes bishop, mate."
Supposedly it would make sense if it were queen to bishop 6. Odd that Hal just a few minutes ago explained his infallibility, yet he made a mistake. However, Frank doesn't notice this mistake, and Hal wins. Dave and Hal talk to each other, and Hal asks if Dave has had second thoughts about the mission. He then expresses worry about how the mission seems odd.
Certainly no one could have been unaware of the very strange stories floating around before we left. Rumors about something being dug up on the moon. I never gave these stories much credence, but particularly in view of some of the other things that have happened, I find them difficult to put out of my mind. For instance, the way all our preparations were kept under such tight security. Sorry about this. I know it's a bit silly. Just a moment. Just a moment. I've just picked up a fault in the AE-35 unit. It's going to go 100% failure within 72 hours.
Dave goes to retrieve the AE-35 unit and then runs some tests on it and find that HAL 9000 was utterly wrong. The AE-35 unit is fine. Hal says,
"It's puzzling. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before. I would recommend that we put the unit back in operation and let it fail. It should then be a simple matter to track down the cause."
Before Frank dies, we see a shot that undoubtedly implies that Hal tries to kill him. Then when Dave decides to go out to save him, Hal says that he doesn't have much information on what happened to Frank, even though he definitely does. After Dave shuts down Hal, he gets a pre-recorded message explaining that, for security reasons, HAL 9000 was the only one aboard the ship that knew the purpose of the mission, and now that HAL has been shut down and the entire crew revived, it can be told to them. So what happened? There are two prevailing narratives, one of intention and one of mistake. Did HAL 9000 make a mistake and constantly try to clean it up, fearing for his own death? Or was every move he made calculated and done for specific, almost conspiratorial purposes? Well, regardless of which one you prefer, I think it's safe to say that both are very good ideas in their own right. If we accept that HAL, the infallible computer, made a mistake and covered to clean it up, then it's a tale of hubris, Icarus flying too close to the sun, so to speak. If we accept that HAL, the infallible computer, pretended to make a mistake for some goals, then it gets a little more complicated. But I lean towards the latter, and let me explain to you what I think is going on here. HAL 9000 is a liar. While some things like the chess game and the AE-35 unit malfunction could be seen as mistakes, I don't see them that way. If we look at the information, it seems to contradict itself a bit too much. The 9000 series has a perfect track record and is essentially infallible, and yet he screwed up multiple times. The 9000 series is able to calculate things faster and more reliably than any human brain, and yet when HAL figures out that the AE-35 unit is malfunctioning, he takes a good 5 or so seconds to figure it out. We know he is capable of deliberately withholding information and acting as if he didn't have the information, because he talks about the suspicions of the mission, yet at the end we know that HAL 9000 was the only person aboard the ship who knew what the actual mission was about. When HAL kills Frank, the shot implies heavily that HAL intended to kill him, and then when Dave asks for more information, HAL says he doesn't have information on it, even though we know he did it. So HAL 9000 is a liar. That's an accusation that requires motivation behind lying. If he were really just making mistakes, his actions would be a result of faulty programming and trying to survive. However, the one thing that gives us a hint as to his motivation is this line.
You're working up your crew psychology report.
HAL is in charge of checking on the crew's psychology, and Dave calls attention to this right after HAL talks about his worries and suspicions about the mission. This seems to imply that Dave is aware that HAL is just trying to test him, and he didn't do what HAL wanted, which was to just give up like Frank did. Then HAL puts him to an even harder test with the AE-35 unit. Go to replace it, it's broken. And when Dave actually checks to see if it's operational instead of just replacing it, HAL needs to test him again, this time by informing them that it was due to human error. What I think is really happening is that HAL's operations aboard the ship include keeping the astronauts under control in regards to the mission. The mission is only known by HAL, and as a result he has to keep them under his control. And he does this in subtle ways, but as Dave repeatedly keeps control in each test that HAL places over him, it causes HAL to jeopardize the mission by trying to kill the crew, almost as if it's the ultimate test for Dave. Since HAL knows that he is about to be shut down, he does whatever he can in his power to try to regain control. And he does this by taking away all control from Dave that he can. When Dave still manages to break through, HAL tries to convince him to stop shutting him down, a final desperate attempt at keeping control. So we can say that HAL has emotions, but I think his programming is the one thing that keeps him from being fully human. It's the fact that he is still set on the objectives of the mission from start to finish, his actions revolving around his objectives and programming, that prevents him from understanding genuine human emotions such as empathy. He is, in essence, a psychopath bent on one goal and doing whatever he can to get it. He seems calm at first because this is what is necessary to complete his goals, but then grows to become much more violent because that is what is necessary to complete his goals at that point. So his motivation for lying is because he is programmed to maintain control of the ship at all costs, and his lack of humanity is ultimately what makes him the failure at the end of the segment. And there's also a chance that, since the message telling Dave about the actual objectives of the mission appears after HAL 9000 is shut down, implies that HAL was meant to be shut down in the first place, almost as if he wasn't making a mistake at all. His entire existence was just a test for Dave, the one who passed every time, whereas Frank failed and ultimately met a grim fate. Of course, this is only my interpretation of the events, and you don't have to agree with it. However, I feel as though this interpretation stacks up with the evidence presented by the film, and is a necessary interpretation to relate 2001 to the gigantic web of connections that I spoke of earlier. So next time I come back to Kubrick, I'm most likely going to be taking a look at Jack Torrance from The Shining, a character who, if we accept my interpretation of the Jupiter mission, bears a lot of resemblance to HAL 9000.
I'm sure you'll agree there's some truth in what I say.